Well, welcome to the Beza Performance live stream. At Beza, we do executive and organizational disciplines for world-class orgs or organizations that want to be world-class. My name is Marshall Henley. I'm the president, and today we have Randall Weidenauer, our friend from VP Culture. Welcome, Randall.
Thanks, Marshall. Thanks for having me.
We love Randall's approach to culture, which focuses on the one thing that motivates all people. And to be sure, there is one thing that motivates all people. So let's start with that, Randall. Let's catch people up on kind of the science that we talked about last time we
The
had you on.
one thing that motivates all people. Yeah, sure. So to start with a story, I was sitting in a Greenwich, Connecticut um, high-end hotel, sitting next to a CEO, and asked him, "So, what is the one thing that motivates all people?" Because it's part of my research to just ask people this survey question as I ask them nationally as I speak, as I sit next to people in the restaurant, and he, of course, thought for a second, and he said, "Isn't it money?" And then he said, "No, that's not it." And he kind of stepped back. He said, "What do you think it is?" And I said, "Well, let me tell you." And one of the things is like money is one thing that pops immediately into somebody's head. And if they think about it a little bit longer as they speak nationally, I ask people to give me feedback, and they say, "Well, maybe it's having something meaningful to do, like accomplishments." And then if it's not that, well, maybe it's enjoying your work. So really, what I do is I change the question slightly, and I ask, instead of the left brain the question, I ask the right brain the question by phrasing it this way: If you could take one thing and take it in from this world and take it through a sci-fi portal into eternity, and that one thing had to motivate you for all eternity, what would be that one thing? And I review through those things. Would you take money and you could sit on Amazon all day and just purchase whatever you wanted? Would that keep you motivated and happy for all eternity? Or you could do one enjoyment activity that you love. You just enjoy playing tennis or riding a bicycle or fishing, whatever it is. You just get to do that one thing, and it has to satisfy you forever. Or you could do some great accomplishment. You could build a great corporation, you could save all the whales, but you'd be alone with that one accomplishment, that one task for the rest of eternity. Would that motivate and satisfy you? And then I flip it on them and I ask them, you could have this one last choice. What if you could be surrounded by those who value you and care for you for all eternity? What would you take? And immediately I can see it in the audience's eyes. They all go, that would work, because the right brain, which is the emotional, motivational side of the brain, knows immediately.
Yeah.
And I love doing that because it's not just like the answer. They've all
Yeah.
felt it, and they look around and like, we all feel this. Everyone in
Yeah.
this
It's
room, from
hardwired.
CEO to welder to frontline to HR professional, they all uniformly say the same thing. And it's
Yeah.
quite something when you're talking to 100 people and they're all like that. To get everyone to answer the question the same way is amazing, especially as a researcher. So it's been the question that not only I, but other scientific researchers have gone around the world and found that that is the one thing that motivates all people. So
Hmm.
valuing people, just to underscore that, is what people are looking for, both to be valued by others and to create values for others. That's the major quest for us as human beings. It's what our minds are fixated on.
And that's obviously where VP Culture, the company name, comes
VP,
from,
yeah,
and the whole
valuing
practice
people.
model. And
Hmm.
right. So you've got an article behind you there, and we kind of teased that this,
Sure,
maybe
yeah.
what's wrong with your culture is you don't have a roadmap. So
Yeah,
let's talk first about like what's wrong with culture in general at
sure,
different,
sure. You and I were looking at this
orgs.
article, and I said this is a great springboard, because it says toxic company culture is the number one reason why workers are quitting jobs. Survey finds. So again, just reinforcing that whole world of, we want the people around us, that's the culture, to not be toxic, which is negativity, but positivity, valuing us and valuing others. We want to see others being valued, because then we could see it's a trusting organization where, hey, people are valued here. People are valuable. And then I can be part of that. When we see people backfighting and dragging each other down, that's kind of what happens by default. Okay, so when we talk about, do you need a plan? Well, you better, because otherwise you're going to have up to 33% of employees are looking for new jobs, according to this survey.
Or no
So,
jobs.
or
The
no
Great
jobs, or
Resignation. Like, if I can't have,
25% have already resigned. In the Great
yeah,
Resignation. So it's ongoing, and it's a significant thing in the workforce, because according to most, workforce is number one thing in your development as an organization, and culture is the thing that makes that workforce grow and flourish. So all those factors combined, necessitate towards the plan, because I was going to show you a few different things that happen by default if you don't.
Right.
So without a
Yeah, last
plan,
time we talked a lot about the brain science behind the one thing, and
sure,
I would refer folks to that video. It's maybe about 45 days ago. We did a live stream
yeah,
with Randall and got into some of that a little deeper. But today we're going to run with the assumption that the science is right on that. That people being connected and feeling valued is in fact the one thing that
hmm
motivates everyone. So if you want to move towards that kind of a culture that creates value by valuing, which seems oxymoronic to me, or not oxymoronic, axiomatic, very different word to me. What's that look like? So
sure.
let's do that.
So how not to? Well, I'll go over a few steps on how not to
Okay.
make a plan, because so often people follow these approaches. So the sort of like, hey, let's just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. That's one type of planning, and a lot of books are out there that have the 21 ways to lead, or the 50 different approaches, and the leaders are given this sort of chicken soup of like, well, maybe I can go in this direction, that direction, and there's no singularity to the culture. So it's like, I don't know, how do I apply? Is there any prime directive in creating this culture? Is there one pathway? Is there any plan at all? And it ends up looking like a bunch of good ideas, but not really a plan. So that's
Hmm.
one approach that a lot of companies do. They just do a lot of leadership development and hope for the best. Okay, but there's no
Right.
unified plan. There's no scientifically developed pathway that they use. The other pathway that is often popular in um, sort of trendy companies, the executives will sit around the little round table here, big ideas like, hey, we want to be bold. Our culture is bold. Our culture is, I don't know, fresh, or it's fast. Those are things. Those are some of the words that some Silicon Valley companies, and it's not scientifically analyzed. It's just like, this is what we want our culture to be. And it ends
Hmm.
up distorting their culture, even though some of these things are good. They're
Yeah.
not bad, and the executives aren't ill-intentioned, but they're not scientifically driven. It's not the one thing that motivates all people, and it's not based on what actual psychologists and anthropologists would say. Yeah, that's what creates culture and motivates it. So what we
Okay.
actually need to do is to focus on having a singular pathway that goes somewhere. Okay, like a prime directive,
Hmm.
and that's valuing people, like we went over, and we went over the scientific reasons for this,
Hmm.
and this needs to be taught and focused on by your group, um, across the board, so that your entire workforce is all kind of firing in the same position, that they all feel that this is the one thing that motivates us all. So
So
that's
I
done
know
with
you're gonna
workshops and education that you can bring into your workforce, and help them to understand that that is really something. You're leading them to themselves, really.
right.
I don't really get a lot of pushback like, no, I don't want to be valued. You know, most people in the workforce go, yeah, that's what I do want.
Yeah.
So it's
My
not a hard
opinion
sell.
matters. I can add value. So maybe it would be helpful, and I know you're going to draw some other stuff, so I don't want to jump the gun, but maybe it would be helpful for us to kind of explain what valuing people could look like in different contexts.
hmm So valuing people in different contexts. Can you
So
explain that a
if
little
I
more?
if I've checked that off, if I'm creating a value people culture at the
hmm
top of my pyramid that you've drawn, what would that look like?
Okay, good. Yeah. So obviously that's part of the problem is I get people in law like, yay, yeah, that's what we want to do. And I
Yeah.
understand that. And they want that too. So I'm oftentimes talking to HR people, and they're like, I'm preaching to the choir. The problem is the well-intentioned people, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. People want that. Once you reveal it to them, they're like, yes, that's what I want. But how do I get there? Okay. And so the problem why we don't create valuing people cultures is we don't have three core steps, three core sciences that I think are required to start building this, so that the
Hmm.
individuals actually feel your intentions. Okay, so intentions aren't enough. You have to actually create that in the people that you're leading. So the first tier, the first prong of that is personality culture or personality science. And then the second one is emotional science, and I'll explain why these are so important. And the third one is value science. So I just abbreviated those. So, and what this does is this helps a person feel known and understood from their past until now. If I can see into your personality using the 5-factor model science, I can actually predict how you're going to perceive my interactions with you. I
Hmm.
can predict your behaviors. And when you start leading people to their strengths, according to Gallup surveys, when I feel like, hey, you know me, and you don't nitpick what I can't do, you promote what I can do.
Hmm.
People start feeling like, hey, this guy really knows me. This leader knows me. My teammates know me and appreciate me. And it creates a whole dynamic, trusting experience in from like they've known me from my past to my present, and they interact with me for who I am. And then the second tier, emotional science, is really in the present. Okay. So a good leader has emotional intelligence and can tell what's going on emotionally because we've
Hmm.
got so that brain, like I illustrated earlier, words, and leaders know how to use those, but they're usually less adroit at using the emotional content. So half of our brain is more than half, about 2/3 of our brain is given over to discerning the emotional content of what is being said and communicated. And that emotional content is what pushes us morally, ethically, and motivationally. So it's very important that leaders be attuned to that in the present. Like, how is this being received by my coworker?
Okay.
And what is the emotional vibe that we're communicating? And it's not just woo-woo science. This has got a lot of science behind it so that STEM fields like engineering, financial trading, surgery, those who can do this skill, because there's kind of a baseline skill. Like if you're a
Yeah.
surgeon, you've already studied, have a PhD in this science. But those who have this extra layer of like emotional intelligence, they excel 10 to 20% better than the rest.
Yeah. We
Okay.
also, with that uh, the last live stream we did with you, you showed how people's functional IQ drops
Yeah.
as their
Yeah.
emotional
That's as
state,
well.
deteriorates.
It's
You can get
fascinating.
to,
Another little tidbit. Let me just toss this one out because it's so
sure.
amazing. What happens to us physiologically if we start feeling that push emotionally? Your eyesight actually narrows. So physiologically, your eyesight changes so that you can only see which is in the center. Your hearing drops so you can only hear like growls and mumbles. So, think about when a policeman pulls you over, what happens to you? Your heart rate start to racing. You can't even find your registration. You don't know where you are. It's an amazing thing. That's an extreme emotional response, but
Sure.
you as an authority can create that in a second in an employee's,
Yeah.
as a leader,
Unintentionally.
and so that just takes your brain offline. So a wise leader knows how to not to activate that portion of the brain, but activate calming portions that actually motivate. You can use challenging things. It's not like you create a world without stress, but people know exactly what to expect. They know that you're not coming in as danger, and that's what the emotional intelligence does.
Okay.
So and then the last column, just in case people are curious, is the future. Value science orientates people towards future, and we use ACT and logotherapy, which is something that Viktor Frankl came up with in
Hmm.
his book Man's Search for Meaning. So it really illustrates two different things. One, the difference between goals, which is all the rage. You always just hear organizations goals, 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 and they're not bad. They're just lower than a value. A value is something that you go to forever. So it gives hope for the future because a goal can be achieved. And then what? Like so
Yeah.
many super rock stars we see, like they get to the pinnacle of their craft and they're like, this is it. And they kind of self destruct because it's not what they expected. But if
Yeah. I
those
kind of think
same
about,
guys kept going towards values like, hey, I value artistry, I value performing for others, I value my kids, I value life, then they would just keep going. It'd be
yeah.
just another milestone in their life.
Yeah, I know Simon Sinek's been talking a lot about game theory and the infinite game
Hmm.
idea behind what we're doing and why things are so unfulfilling when you reach the end of something, but
Yeah.
you didn't know you were in an infinite game,
Yeah, you got
which
your
I think
ladder
is
up the wrong wall and you've been climbing all your life.
yeah. So back to the roadmap then. If you could
Yeah.
kind of show us the diagram, the idea, I guess, is that we progress through these three different levels or three different types of science.
Hmm.
Is there an order? I mean, obviously, most organizations of any size have some sort of personality testing they use for
Yeah.
applicants, and maybe they use it in a management structure somewhere.
Sure,
But
sure,
what does the roadmap look like as it's being executed
sure.
contextually?
So there's a couple functional things that we'll mention real quick.
Okay.
First of all, you have to decide who do you need to start with. Um, if can you are you just doing it at a departmental level? Are you doing it, across the entire, are you a campus that needs to work on this, or are you going to do this system wide in your organization? And so there's a lot of detail that needs to be worked out as to, how healthy are your leaders? Do they know some of this stuff already? Have you worked through some of these functionalities already? So
So
all of that's going to
that's a good
be.
question.
Mhm.
Would you recommend starting with leadership um, training on the idea of valuing people as a centralized value? I mean, I would think that it should show up in your mission, vision, values if it's actually held as a organizational value.
Yeah, so there's two questions there. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
definitely good to let the leadership feel comfortable with the material before they are responsible to start rolling it out to their subordinates and the people that are on their teams. So, getting them comfortable with the ideas makes it socializing very well, so they understand where they're going before they're expected to lead in that direction. So that is something that we often see happen is we'll start off with a tier of the company and then we'll redo the same process for a broader section of the workforce. So depending on how many campuses, how many shifts, how many this, there's a lot of factors that go into it. We work with organizations as to how to structure it technically or practically with their given workforce configuration.
So I know a lot of HR folks are going to watch this, and I mean, if we're going to be honest, there are organizations where these types of ideas are well thought of by the HR professionals, but senior executive management, it's just foo-foo stuff. They're about the numbers, or and this may be an extreme example, but let's take that scenario or
Yeah,
something like it and contextualize that for somebody.
yeah,
What's a good
that's
way
a
to
good point.
implement the
I get
cultural
that
roadmap?
that comment like how do I
Yeah,
socialize this to my bosses.
right.
And we've talked about this. There's two different types of bosses. Ones that they're already on board. They're culture fans. They want to create a great culture and they work really hard at it. So something like this is attractive to them, and that like this helps them to start organizing the different pieces that they've already put into their culture into a little bit more unified plan if they haven't already executed that. And then there's the second executive who might be skeptical and excuse me, they have more of a focus on old school, that the finance has to be always first. Finance needs to occupy this tier here. And interestingly enough, not just the science, but the economic science, the business science, the management science, all points to what we discussed last time, is that when you value people, the financial aspect always follows in lockstep. So if you want to increase your financial outcomes, you need to create the value for the people, and that follows in lockstep. Whereas the
Sure.
other
And
one tends to
obviously,
have a more deleterious effect on the value of people, and you'll start shedding your workforce, which is so important for creating that financial success. So
yeah,
you're
and
not
we
going
did
to
a
get
nice job.
forward by getting these critical elements out of order. So there's business cases that I often make in my videos. There's raw data and studies that can be show that companies that have this kind of a culture are 11% higher stock value. So I'm not the only guy that has studied this. It's been studied pretty well across the business world, and companies that are in the know that this is the future of that 20% extra margin that you can get out of a company. And it's not by squeezing your people more, it's by valuing them more. So it's a very fascinating twist on how we really function as organizations.
So let's say you take these ideas and you socialize them with senior management, and they don't land. That was the kind of the scenario I was setting up. They don't land that
Hmm.
well. They're still not convinced.
Yeah.
What's a good way to start down that particular path, sub path of the roadmap?
Yeah. So there's been studies that show that this is kind of hard to say. So you might have two corporations if you're comparing corporation A and B, and you might see that this company's corporate culture is 10% better. But if you open up company A, you'll see that there's more variance from leader to leader within their organization. So like this guy might have a 60% average, and this guy 80%, and this guy's a 20, and this guy's a 10, and so all of this different variation from leader to leader. So what this is saying is that there's value in bringing this leadership training to even like a department level.
Okay.
Of course, it's going to be better if it's top down and that 100% of your leadership and everyone is on board. But if you can improve, this leader, this leader, this leader, this leader, you're going to improve your culture overall, because there's an axiomatic statement that people leave leaders, they don't leave organizations. So if your direct leader over you is causing you pain and causing that toxic culture, you're going to leave that leader. And if you don't have the opportunity to jump to another team, you're going to jump to another organization.
Okay. So
So
then
there's value.
the training that you're referring to, or what you would work on, would be the three pillars: the personality science,
Correct.
the okay, and
And
then
go ahead.
typically, what kind of time frame do you look at investing in those types of things?
Yeah, that's another good logistical issue. It's like a lot of times I either talk to people and I was talking to a leader and a plant manager just yesterday, and he was saying we don't have time or we don't do that, and because we tried it once, and so we didn't have any content to deliver. But Dr. Henry Cloud, who's a classic consultant in this area, he's a psychologist. He says the role of leadership is to focus the minds of the people in the organization. So you need to take time and have meetings, not for just the sake of doing things, but to focus the mind of what is really important in your organization. If you don't take time, if you don't practice this, you won't create culture, period.
And those meetings
So
would consist of what, and like how long would they be? What do you recommend? Is what I'm
what do I
really getting.
recommend?
Yeah.
My personal approach, 30 minutes a week minimum. So if you can spare 15 to 30 minutes a week, you're going to be well on down the path, because you're reinforcing that content every week. So an ideal platform is have like a large workshop that might be for your entire leadership in a sector, and bring them in on one of these concepts. We start them off here, get them going on the idea of valuing people as the core culture, and some culture science, why that works, what's the background behind that, and socialize that, and then start on each one of these secondary levels here, like personality science, emotional science. And I think that this should really take about almost a year to go through,
Okay.
and reviewing that and taking that down to different levels of your workforce could be several years. So
Sure.
culture development is a very long game. It's not something you're going to fix in a second, because it wasn't built in a day.
Right. So, just before we go too much further, folks, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you'll always have a chance to catch the Beza Performance live streams with folks like Randall moving forward. We appreciate it, and it's also going to keep you exposed to a lot of new ideas that move the needle. So, Randall, as we continue talking about like what the roadmap would look like, we've got the three core areas that make up the valuing people sciences, and you've got the amount of time you're recommending, 15 to 30 minutes a week in meetings. What's in the meetings? What's actually happening week to week?
Yeah, that's the other functional issue that people run into. Even like when you read lots of books in this area, you do need an organized curriculum in order to pull this off well. Um, your leaders have to go in a systematic way and teach different sections of this in a systematic way to review whatever's been presented in your all hands meetings. So having a curriculum with specific content in these areas is very critical, so that you're not going into it blind, because it's very difficult. And this is one of the reasons why I did initially, and a lot of leaders give up on the meetings, because it's like, what do I say?
Yeah.
How long do I go on? I read a whole book on this, and what am I going to spend an hour talking about this? And then I come up with some other random self-help book next week, and how does that all
Yeah.
stick together? And then you end up with this other look where it's like everyone's going every which direction, and your team is like, so those are all great things, but how does it all connect? Where are we going? And it
So that's, I
becomes
guess, my
so the
question. How do I conduct a year's worth of meetings using those three sciences, but it all ends up being unified?
yeah.
What's that look like?
What does that look like? So yeah, that's what I mean. That's something that I developed, and I think there are other things that are out there that can be used to
Hmm.
if you wanted to self-direct and put some of these things in. But you have to take the time to either take a curriculum off the shelf that looks like this, or you know use a curriculum that's already created. So there are information. I went out there and got information for current standing scientists, things that have been done in the field for 30
Hmm.
years, and put them together for people because I didn't find that organization out there. I had to pull it together from very valid scientific backgrounds, but no one was quite putting the organization. They were still having that sort of bifurcated, like, okay, we need to lead people towards financial success over here, and
Yeah.
then and people over here, and here's 50 things to do. They didn't organize it into sort of a comprehensive plan that was easily understood and
Okay.
followable.
Well,
I can
maybe if we
remember
start
three
with the
things, but not
personality
50.
science. Pardon? I
I can
missed that.
remember
I
three
apologize.
things, but not 50. So
Right.
that's the part of the gene, or part of the, I think, the efficaciousness of this kind of a plan. It has to be simple enough where I can draw it on a board like that, and everyone goes, "That's what we're doing. I get it."
Yeah. So I guess if we focus on the personality science, most people have DISC or something like that they could deploy.
Hmm. Hmm.
What would they be doing on a weekly basis with DISC while they're training people and talking about that? And then how would that second question be tied back to like a valuing people focus? I think that's where people are going to want to understand, like, what does that roadmap look like?
Sure, I'll take it from a five-factor model perspective because
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
that's what I use primarily
Sure.
because it's the most scientifically validated process.
Right.
Um, so what would that look like? So basically, you need to view the prime directive. Like on the worksheet sheets that I make, right on the top of every worksheet, the prime directive is right there. You are creating a culture about valuing people.
Hmm.
And then it's really interesting, like when you go through the personality science and you engage with an employee that says, hey, they discover that they're really high in openness, which is, I like ideas. And they find like there's another person on their team that's really low in openness. They
Hmm.
like doing the same thing over and over again. They start to see like, yeah, when we introduced that new piece of software, I was all over it and loved it. And you didn't really like it at first. You've adapted to the process and you just keep running it really well. Whereas I want to learn a new piece of software and I can't keep running the same software. So they
Hmm.
start to say, hey, I know myself and I'm able to like speak about my weaknesses and my strengths and your strengths and your weaknesses. And you see the lights start going on in people's eyes going like, yeah, that is me. Yeah, that is you. You're good at that and I'm good at this and we could work together like this. So it starts to generate these really great conversations around personality in a way that, we don't usually have refined terms for who we are as individuals to describe how we like to perceive the world, how we like to behave in the world.
Right.
So, you know, when you get into it, it's really cool how this was all produced, but the outcomes, you start to see people like, I'm feeling valued because you know and understand me. That's what this first one does. And it's a great place to start because it's easy to understand. You can take a test and it points out who you are. And, it doesn't get into like really deep emotional things, which are a little bit more difficult to tackle because they're a little bit more subjective. This one's very kind of objective, and it's a great dynamic that really launches the whole uh, feeling valued, seen in your team. So it's a great place to start, and that's where encourage people to start.
Okay. Well, great. Thanks again, Randall, for joining me. And we'll have Randall back in the future. Join us next week on April 28th, 3 p.m. Eastern, for a look at demand planning vis-a-vis SNOP on SNOP Thursday. And no, they are not the same thing. Demand planning is distinct. So don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep in contact. And don't hesitate to reach out to us at Beza Performance, bezaperformance.com, BEZ as in zebra A, performance.com. Until next time. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.